Pastor Jasmine, Yamin, and Obade, who really have organized this event. And I'm also glad to have our counterpart, let's say, from York, Tash. You know, each one will be having the opportunity to introduce. So, I mean, my role here will be, I have been coordinating this Erasmus project. Erasmus, you know, some words. In this case, it has been a 3-year project, which is ending on the 29th of August. And during those 3 years, what we have designed these educational resources, which now we have the privilege to be able to pilot it with you. So, I mean, that's what I could tell you about my role here. These resources are, and hopefully you will find them, hopefully, you know, maybe useful or not useful. So now it will be your turn to tell us if community, you know, FBI, you know, it's like local intelligence agents who are, you know, hey, this is happening. I am not seeing, you know, this guy, or I'm not seeing him anymore. Or I'm not something to be aware, and that's why this is absolutely important. Community awareness, okay, for this specific one. And of course, if we talk about,
it's been directed at me. So in the schools through our Safe Schools Partnership, obviously we come up, we do lots of stuff. Reactively as well as the proactive work that we do. So I can think of a few examples. We've had a number of incidents. I mean, we help with bullying incidents all the time in school, but sometimes that's aggravated with maybe a bit of racism or a little bit of homophobia, that type of thing. But it's nice in a way that we've done that proactive work, because when we work with the young people around, we do some intervention around these incidents, we can refer back to the work that we previously did with them and say, look, do you remember when we spoke about this, etc. And sometimes that involves a visit to the home address as well, because we can have that conversation with their parents as well as the young people in the room, which sometimes is relevant and it's helpful. Other examples, again in school, there was one school in particular that had a little bit of a phase of, it lasted for a few weeks, where the year 7s, worryingly, because they were the youngsters that we'd only just done the project with around hate crime, were going around, a little bit of a craze, they were going around putting swastikas, graffitiing swastikas around the school. So a couple of examples there that I've been involved with.
Is it? Yeah.
This one was about judgment, internal sort of judgment, and then and also external judgment. But then we were thinking that the acts of prejudice is more about that external action is taken to the next level. And we just had a discussion about sort of Germany and around Hitler, and at times when the sort of Jews were having to move out of their houses and stuff, and what they considered their friends were moving in, and they weren't considering that it used to be their friend's home, that it was actually happening on this level. So we were talking about that, and then we said that discrimination, number 3, was about implementing judgment and external action, when it actually started to have that impact on people.
And this happened in 2009 after the, you know, that Danish cartoonist who, a Somali guy tried to kill him in Copenhagen. Coming back from the December Christmas break in January, one of my tutees just called me, Mr. Hassan, terrorist, and then I challenged the child and said, what made you call me that? And the child said, no, I didn't mean you, but was that guy who tried to do that incident, was he your cousin, or were you related to him? Trying to change, you know, it was not actually, it was kind of like, I think, prejudice attitude, because these young children, they don't understand the magnitude of what they're saying. And by challenging them, by asking them, you know, questions and trying to kind of like make them reflect is the only way to educate them. Otherwise, you know, you cannot. They are minors. You can't actually handle them like the way you will challenge someone who is old. So that is my experience of seeing that. And also during you know, like in the build up to the referendum, Year 7 QT challenged me about, you know, like there are a lot of Muslims coming to this country. Maybe Buckingham Palace will be changed to you know, might change to a mosque in the near future. And this is not them to blame. This is actually what they are getting from home. So as you said, as you rightly said, having conversations with parents at home will be more of a way to deal with this kind of like situations. And when I worked with the, you know, community engagement policy in Northampton, I used to get attacked by the students. I thought it's behavioral. I think the school's name has changed now. It's called maybe Cambian School in Northampton, Prince Park Parade. And we used to call the police all the time because it was a violent environment. The way we handled that was through restorative justice. I don't know if many of you are aware, and that was really positive. It had a lot of change in the kids' attitudes and their parents and all of that. Thank you.
In my job at University in Northampton, I've had comments from people, like race-based comments. Nearly half our students are black, Asian, minority ethnic, and that's nearly 7,000 students out of 14,000. And these are in staff meetings as well. It's not just on a student level, it's at a senior level as well. Number 2 is what I call top-down prejudice. So the racism that we see on television from people like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, people working class people will see it and then think it's okay. So then it's being taught from the top, and then from the bottom working class people will start saying it, so then it will squeeze on everyone who's in between. So I call that top-down prejudice, basically. And number 3 is, I'll start with the BAME attainment gap, which is the difference between a black student getting a 2-1 or a first degree and a white student. And at the moment in the UK the gap is 20%. So white students are currently at 75% thereabouts, and black students are at 55% attaining a good degree from university. Also racism, you'd think it is from black or white to black, but I think a lot of racism I see is from Asian communities to black communities, which is something that universities don't want to see, they don't want to know about it, basically, and it's about opening those conversations and giving them no space to wiggle, essentially. Homophobia and transphobia, I've seen it in Northampton. I've got friends that are too scared to hold hands on Abington Street out of fear of being persecuted by society, essentially. And institutional racism in higher education and further education and the NHS and places like the police. It's decades in the making, centuries even, and those conversations will help take those barriers down, essentially. So yeah, that's all I've got.
We can really see the importance of deconstructing.
Yeah.
How you doing? All right?
You can get you water.
The workshop's very good. We've got a very good mix here that We are getting very good views and ideas. This is very educational with the truth what's coming out, and my role as chair of IAG is to make sure Northampton is cohesion in working with the police and working with all communities, and we have a better Northampton.
Well, it's actually very important to identify prejudice, even at its most basic levels. And I often think of this situation where people can refer to other people as, they can get to the point of talking about some people as vermin, for example, and then it's not far step from that to actually attacking people. So it's and that can start much more innocent, making jokes about people who are disadvantaged, and it can just escalate. So this is what's very important about this first part. But the even more important part is that we're going on now to talk about the pyramid of hate. So how do you reverse a process that has begun, a negative process? How do you reverse that to become a positive process is what we're going to be looking at next.
Okay, I'm a police officer, Ishmael Nawaz, based at Wellingborough. So I'm the local neighbourhood officer for Wellingborough, cover Castle and the town centre. From my point of view, obviously hate crime, I've had some dealings with it from, again, like school level, to that could be students, you know, like the swastika. I've had incidents where neighbours have been victims of racial abuse from other neighbours, where one person believes they're being targeted because of their race or their gender or their sexuality. How we deal with it, you know, Northampton Police take a positive view on it. We obviously there's a hate incident, there's a hate crime for each incident we go to, whether it's an incident or a crime. We have a hate crime risk assessment we go through. We offer the victim support through voice. We have obviously a hate crime officer and hate crime champions within the organisation that we can go to for advice. And yeah, that's it really. Yeah.
Fair enough, yeah. Thank you.
Steve Coles, and I work in the neighbourhood policing team as well, but in my case working in Corby, and I have a specific role within the secondary schools in the town, and so yeah, I help the schools deal with, in a reactive way, with incidents as and when they occur. So it could be hate incidents. Occasionally they actually have hate crime as well. But also we do a lot of proactive work. So that what I mean by that is we do a lot of workshops, primarily around year 7s, and the idea there is that we introduce the concept of hate crime, we introduce the meanings of what we mean by prejudice and discrimination and perception, and how perception is key and how that sometimes differs from other types of crime, in that really perception is the thing that governs whether or not we would record a hate incident. We explain that we would always record a hate incident when it's disclosed to us, regardless of whether it's a crime. And it's not unusual then for the schools to come to us and say, look, Steve, you know, we're having a little bit of an issue at the moment around a particular group of students, or a particular year group sometimes as well, where they're starting to see issues arising perhaps around certain types of prejudice, and so we'll go in and do some work reactively to that as well.
Thank you.
Stops by police because they have prejudicial ideas.
A lot of stop and search, so then the impact on people from that community not wanting to report crime.
Potential.
Yeah. No, we understand that, and there are lots of people within the organisation that are working around building that community engagement and understanding the issues that are within the community. My sole focus is hate crime. Doesn't mean that I don't understand and recognise those issues that are within our community and that they have an impact on people that report. Hate crime is underreported from most backgrounds, and we do understand the reasons why that happened, but I would urge people to report it.
What action to the police, what action has the police been in a position to do to reinforce that confidence that someone's not just reporting a crime or an incident and then it's just becoming another police statistic?
We've recently set up, it's called a HASBAG, and it's a hate and antisocial action group. So if we get incidents of hate crime where, say for instance, it's neighbour nuisance, we've got a family in Wellingborough at the moment and they're having lots of issues, they're being targeted because they're Polish, and it ranges from door knocking to damage to their car, to eggs thrown at their house, to various other things. And what we'll do is we'll have a strategy meeting with housing, health, schools, and we'll talk about the perpetrators. So are they in a council property, for instance? Is this now part of their tenancy agreement? Are they affecting that? What other ways can we look at dealing with these perpetrators, and what support can we give to that victim? So are there any organisations outside of the police that can support them? What can we do as officers or community staff that can support those victims?
So you've given a very good example in terms of the different mechanisms or the different things that can actually be put in place. So I think people are probably clear in terms of that side of things, but then the success, what does success look for? We already know what the problem looks like, but what about what does success look like?
We recently had a family who were being targeted by their neighbour racially. That neighbour was taken to court and his tenancy was demoted and he was evicted from his property. We had other people who have been arrested and have gone through the criminal justice system. Obviously, I don't want to go into too much detail about specific people because it's not fair, on you know, in case anybody could identify them. But I know that sometimes in the community it can be difficult to look at the police and say, oh, you know, how are you dealing with hate crime? How do you deal with specific incidents? And that's my job. That's to make sure that we are dealing with it effectively. We're giving the victims the support that they need, and we're looking at mechanisms that we can really deal with perpetrators. So I'm doing a lot of work around young offenders at the moment and re-educating people who are perpetrators of hate crime who are younger. At the moment, we've got the criminal justice system and then we've got the school. What have we got in between to challenge those behaviours and challenge what they may be seeing at home or in other areas? So there's lots of different pockets of stuff that's going on at the moment.
Tonight, about 50 youngsters up to the age of 12 are going to this church hall, having a lot of activities. Their parents are going because they've become volunteers and helpers, gone all through the tests. This is building a better community. This takes away a lot of the race hate, what's about, because it brings people together. This, I will say, it's been funded by the police commissioner. They run a tuck shop to raise funds themselves now. This idea was started after a stabbing, a fatal stabbing. Now it's so successful that it's challenging how many are turning up. Now every community could do this, and it's not staying in your group or their group. It's coming together and making things happen. And that is a lot better than trying to find fault.
So if those mechanisms that you're now talking about, if they were in place before the stabbing took place, potentially could those mechanisms that you now have in place, could they have prevented that? So as a county, why are we not doing more in terms of what you've got in your neck of the woods? Because what you've got in your neck of the woods probably isn't in other parts of Northampton, Shire as a whole.
I'll tell you where it's in our neck of the woods. There's people who put their time and effort in voluntary. Now that's what a community is. It's about doing things for the community to make it better. If you bring these children up what are coming now and they get the right path to travel on, you probably will minimise the risk of a stabbing.
I agree with you.
You'll probably get those on a good career because they've had the challenges, they're getting the right education at that hour at night. There's another thing what happens on a Friday night. Junior Anderson is a police officer. He travels from Corby every Friday night. Doesn't get paid for it. He takes kickboxing and he's teaching the principles of kickboxing, the the way you have to present yourself, the control what you have to have. And this is teaching youngsters which are over 12, to come into the community.
So is this a police officer that's engaging with young people?
Yes, but this is not through the police. He's doing it. He's a black belt.
So do you not feel that, based on him being a police officer, again, he can be seen as a role model? Do you not feel that it could? Do you not feel that if there was maybe more police officers that were doing the kind of work that he's doing, again, that may be seen as a preventative?
But there again, you're pigeonholing that all these things should be started with a police officer and it's up to them. I think the people in the community should stand up and do it. There's a lot of communities around this town what don't have enough people, and if you get a couple of inspired, like Trey, young person like that with a lot of truth in him, speaking to youngsters, it can make a difference. And these things need to happen. I mean, I see it tonight. We've all got problems. All those problems there. What you've got to realise is that we'll talk about it tonight. What are you going to do tomorrow? That's what you've got to do. Build your communities up. Get things running in them. You can't
have police officers that the community will work really hard to explain to people and engage with the people and tell them that, look, this hate crime needs to be reported. And then when they go to report something that has happened to them, then they find police officer question them that they are the one who commit the hate crime. Then they become two-way victims. They have multiple victims because they are victim by somebody, and then they try to report to the police, and then this police officer is now accusing and questioning them that they are the one actually being the bully or the one conducting the hate crime. That is why you find a lot of communities don't want to report. That is what they've been facing. And you have good police officers who do their work, and then you have the other police officers who make people think that, okay, we can't trust the system. So what do we do?
I think in terms of when we're talking about Northampton Town, Northamptonshire, I think constantly the police are put into the public, into the limelight, and I think it's a bit unfair because it's not just the police, it's not their responsibility, just as you said, it's members of the community, it's like yourselves, but it's never yourselves that are in the public domain, it's always the police. It's never the schools that are in the public domain, it's always the police. And I think in terms of communication is key, and making people more aware of the different statutory organisations that are dealing with the problem and how they're dealing with, which is why I was asking to give an example. But I think it's wrong to constantly blaming the police, especially when the police, they're very clear in terms of their purpose, but they're also very clear in terms of the fact that they're not the only statutory organisation that are meant to be dealing with the problem, but they're the only ones that seem to be out there in the public domain.
Of our issue, as it were. And that means all of us in terms of our partners, in terms of other statutory organisations, but as well as in the community as well. Because we see it starts right down low, and it works its way up, and it's all of our responsibility.